to welcome you to today's colloquium. Today's lecture is sponsored by the Clarence Stein Institute for Urban and Landscape Studies. Before introducing a speaker, I'd like to begin with our department's acknowledgement. Cornell University and our Department of City and Regional Planning is located on the traditional homelands of the Gayukono, the Cayuga Nation. The Gayukono are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with an historic and a contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy, of course, precedes the establishment of Cornell University, of New York State, and of the United States of America. The department acknowledges the painful history of Gayukono dispossession and honors the ongoing connection of Gayukono people, past and present, to these lands and waters. Now, today's speaker, Professor PhD Andre Perry, earned his PhD at the University of Maryland's School of Education Policy and Leadership, and has an earlier book called The Garden Path, The Miseducation of a City. Professor Perry's made the transition from education policy to other forms of urban policy, and maybe he'll mention that in the beginning. But he is the author of the 2020 acclaimed book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. Andre Perry is a fellow in the Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institution, is a scholar in residence at American University, and a nationally known and respected commentator on issues of race, structural inequality, and education. So I'm delighted to welcome Andre, and I look forward to his remarks and your and the audience's probing questions. Andre, the floor or the Zoom room is all yours. Go for it.
Well, thanks, John, for the introduction. And I don't know if some of you heard or were privy to the conversation, but before we formally started, but John asked me a question I get asked all the time, because most people, 3 years ago, most people only knew me for conversations around education. And over the last 2 years, I've been invited to planning schools, various economic conferences, architecture schools, to talk about my research. Now, so much of my career trajectory shifted when after only being in New Orleans as a young assistant professor for a year, something dramatic happened in New Orleans in 25. You may know of it. It was Hurricane Katrina. And at the time, I was really an immigrant education rights expert. I wrote about the DREAM Act, which still hasn't really caught hold. And I was working on immigrant educational rights. Like a lot of people in New Orleans, I had to evacuate. And my then girlfriend, now wife, we went to the same area together, and Hurricane Katrina came through, and then shortly after the levees breached, and our lives dramatically shifted. And I remember when it happened, going, "Oh my God, this is going to be the biggest social science experiment of all time." I kept saying that, and I, knowing that our homes were destroyed, everything. I said, "Wow, this is going to change everything." And I took my car at the time and I drove to Baton Rouge. We were in Grambling, Louisiana. I drove to Baton Rouge maybe a week after, and I just started popping my head in various meetings, believe it or not. I mean, I would just show up and people would allow me in the room. And I started talking to mayors and legislators of all kinds. And eventually the dean of the College of Education said, hey, you seem to know all this federal policy stuff. Can you help us get funding for our charter schools? And at the time, University of New Orleans had 2 charter schools. And we heard that the Department of Ed was going to release a bunch of money through the charter school office to help get these schools back off the ground. And I said, sure, I don't know anything really about K-12 education. I was more of a policy person. And so I said, yeah, I can do it. But it was in the context of so much change, housing. I mean, the schools were physically shuttered. People's homes were destroyed. And so we were not just talking about rebuilding schools, we were talking about rebuilding communities. And I remember sitting on a panel with then HUD Secretary Sean Donovan, and somebody, a business leader, said, if we could only fix the schools, everything will be all right. And I said, kids don't live in schools, they live in communities. And we need to look at the entire context. Schools only fit in a context of other systems. And this, to only say, if we could fix the schools, to abdicate our responsibility in fixing housing, fixing transportation, fixing communities overall, helping communities, I should say, restore themselves. And that changed my life. When I say I started researching all these other things that were related to education, and in terms of housing, transportation, the workforce. So I'm about to present to you a byproduct of that experience, really. I mean, when someone writes a book, it just doesn't come from, that moment. It really comes from a journey of sorts. And so this is just part of my journey. And this is a sort of an end product of my journey. Well, I should say end product, a product of my journey. And so I'm going to actually share my screen because I'm going to present for a while till probably like around 1 o'clock, and then you guys can chime in. Worthy of investment, the devaluation of assets in Black communities. And I'll introduce myself in this presentation. So here we go. And a lot of this you can you see the chart, Know Your Price? Just give me a thumbs up. Okay, very good. So a lot of this can be found in my book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black City, available wherever fine books are sold. So make sure you get it. And at the Brookings Institution, where I'm a senior fellow, I study Black majority cities, one of them being New Orleans, if you can make it out of all those dots. I also study Black majority neighborhoods, but there are way too many neighborhoods to put on a map. But I generally study the assets in Black majority cities, the schools, the businesses, the homes, all the things that can excite economic mobility. And I look at the impacts of racism on those assets. So I'm going to start with like a lot of good stories by looking at home. This is actually my house where I grew up. This is 1320 Hill Avenue, Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. Wilkinsburg is a small Black majority municipality surrounded by Pittsburgh on 3 sides. I grew up not knowing the difference between Wilkinsburg and Pittsburgh because Pittsburgh literally surrounds a small Black community. But as you can see here, the home is boarded up, the roof is bowed. It's been abandoned for about 20 years now. You can actually purchase a home if you want it by agreeing to pay taxes to the municipality of Wilkinsburg. But the home is worth so much more to me for this reason. That woman in the upper right-hand corner, her name is Elsie Boyd. I call her mom. Now, the way the story was told to me, that mom made a deal with my maternal grandmother that she would take me into 1320 Hill Avenue to take care of me. Now, I don't, at the time, my mother was poor. She was young. She had my older brother when she was 15, had me when she was 17, and she was probably abused. Now, at the time, I was born, I'm 50 years old. I was raised in the 70s, and it was a difficult time in Pittsburgh. US Steel was pulling out. It was, unemployment was 20%. And as you know, that we don't necessarily know what the Black unemployment rate was, but we know that during normal times, the Black unemployment rate is double that of the white rate. But so it was very hard for my family, as a lot of families. So she took in kids, and you can see she took in a lot of kids. She took in between 12 to 15 kids. Some would stay for a few months, some would stay for years. I stayed from my birth to I graduated from high school. And she reared white kids, Black kids, mixed kids. So, I grew up in this kind of environment. So that home is worth so much more than what it is price. My father, his name is Floyd Criswell. He probably abused my mother. He was a heroin addict. He was in and out of prison. He eventually was murdered inside of Jackson State Penitentiary, right outside of Detroit, not right outside, about 45 minutes outside of Detroit. And we know that he died a day before his 27th birthday. He was stabbed in the heart, a single stab wound to the heart in the morning, which probably means he died in his sleep. He was in an open area. And I really just found this out in the last few years in researching my book. I didn't really know him. I never really invested in knowing him until recently. But I was always told he died breaking up a fight in prison. I never quite believed that. So when I found out he died to a single stab wound in the heart, which we always have to question police reports and during that time, but I tend to believe it. But I started researching how he lived, how my mom lived, Elsie Boyd lived. And that started with an examination of housing, because housing is so integral to our lives in terms of so many different policies. But before I get into housing, just to save a little time, I usually go into each of these circles, but I won't for this time. But my father and the woman who raised me, my mom, they all went through all of these different things. They both lived in areas that were redlined. We know the Homeowners Loan Corporation deemed Black majority neighborhoods unworthy or hazardous. And so they drew red lines on them, prohibiting low interest loans in those areas and down payment assistance. So my family lived in there. They also barreled through their communities. So you had that. They were part of urban renewal, in particular in Pittsburgh. They bulldozed the areas near where they eventually built the Civic Arena. People were displaced all over the city. That's how my family ended up in Wilkinsburg. They also lived in areas where there's predatory lending. In particular, my father lived in neighborhoods where there was these predatory rent-to-own schemes that were all over the place. And then there were restrictive housing covenants all around them. So they could not move out of these places because they were surrounded essentially by white suburbs. And so my family's experienced all of that at the same time. But then I started to look at the impacts on housing today. If you look at this chart, this is a chart of home prices by zip code. On that x-axis, that's the concentration of Black people in a zip code. On the y-axis, as indicated by the price on top of the bar, that's the average listing price of homes in that zip code. And so you can see, and we looked at Zillow and census data, and it's pretty consistent that, but you can see homes in areas where the share of the Black population is less than 1%. On average, those homes are about $341,000. And they are about half as much in areas where the share of the Black population is 50% or higher. Now, a lot of people get this and they know this, but a lot of people will say, well, that's because of education. That's because of crime. But those are things you can control for in a study. And that's what we did. We took that price, absolute price, but we control for structural characteristics to get an apples to apples comparisons of homes of similar size, same number of rooms, same number of windows, all those different things. But then we control for neighborhood amenities. So education, crime, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics that you see. Because we wanted to get an apples to apples comparison between homes in Black neighborhoods where the share of the population, Black population is 50% or higher, against those that are less than 1%. So again, apples to apples comparison. And what we found that homes in Black neighborhoods are underpriced by 23%, about $48,000 per home. Accumulatively, that's about $156 billion in lost equity. Now, it's a big number, and we'll go into that a little bit later. And this is occurring all across the country. Wherever you see a magenta circle, that's where housing devaluation is occurring. Wherever you see a green circle, that's where the homes in Black neighborhoods are actually priced higher than their white counterparts. But the overall trend is lower pricing, lower prices. Pittsburgh, where I grew up, it is 11%, about 11,000 per home, which is not as bad as a lot of what you will see all across the country. Lynchburg, Virginia, for instance, 81% difference, meaning if you helicoptered a home in a Black neighborhood and put it in a similar situated white neighborhood, it would increase in value by 81%, 81%. 65% in Rochester, Jacksonville, 47. Again, there are places where the value of homes or the price of homes in Black neighborhoods are priced higher. Nashville, plus 10%, Wichita Falls, plus 16, Boston, plus 23. Now, I always say this, Boston is no less racist than Lynchburg, but the home prices are higher. I'm going to just put this into context, just so people understand 156 billion is a big number. I just want to put it in context for you. 156 billion is would have paid for more than or financed more than 4.4 million Black-owned businesses based on the average amount Blacks use to start up their firms. It would have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based on the average amount of a public four-year education. Replace the pipes in Flint, Michigan 3,000 times over. It would have covered almost all of Hurricane Katrina damage. You see the connection there. And it's doubled the annual economic burden. Put that last bullet there is because my father, who died of a heroin, essentially went to prison because of heroin. He died as a result. If he would have lived in a neighborhood in which his home values were at the market rate or the white rate, he would have had better schools, because remember, we finance those through how property is assessed. He would have had better services. He would have more chance to start a business, a greater likelihood to go to college. His life would have been different. He certainly would not have, his family may have had the wealth to send him to a rehab instead of going to prison because of his addiction. Now, I just put that in context because you know, when we're talking about housing and infrastructure and all these things, it has consequences on people's lives. And so I put that there. To deny racism is to deny opportunities for people. This is why, and you can see on my t-shirt, I have this, there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. I say that all the time. When things go wrong in Black communities, we blame Black people. Instead of looking at the overarching policies that have extracted wealth over time, changing the life trajectory of people. I'm going to just show you a little clip here of this is Representative Al Green. I testified a few years ago to the Financial Services Committee on appraisals. Appraisals are in the news. Appraisers are in the news. There's been some high-flying cases in which homes were originally appraised low, and then when they replaced the owner with a white person and removed all the Black books and art, the appraiser came back with a much higher appraiser, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars higher. And so I'm just going to show you a little clip. Now, keep in mind, if there's any one area we know that there's significant discrimination is housing, right? We know it. So I just listened to this clip of Representative Al Green.
If you think Black people are being discriminated when their property is being appraised, would you kindly raise your hand? One person on the panel. If you think that, for fear that I'm not communicating well, if you think that Black people are not being discriminated against when their property is being appraised, if you think they're not being discriminated against, kindly raise your hand. Okay, hands now, we're getting some consternation, I see.
You know, when that happened, I said, wow, and I was actually shocked because we have so many cases of discrimination in all aspects of the housing market. I was shocked. I mean, when I raised my hand, I said, did I hear them correctly? I mean, there should be more hands being raised, but no. So I'm going to move on to another topic just to show the interconnectivity of issues. I do a lot on business and business devaluation, because most people start their homes, most people start their businesses using the equity in their homes. So if you don't have equity, guess what? You're going to have fewer businesses. Now, Black people represent about 14% of the population roughly, but only 2% of the nation's employer businesses, meaning businesses with more than one employee. Now, 1% of Black business owners were able to obtain a loan in their founding year compared to 7% of white entrepreneurs. Again, remember, most people start their businesses using the equity in their home, so those numbers are both low, but you can see the difference. When we do get loans, Black entrepreneurs are denied bank loans more than twice as often as their white peers. And when we do get loans, we get them at higher interest rates. About half of Black businesses survived the Great Recession compared to 60% of white-owned firms. Again, wealth provides that cushion. So if you have equity, you can better withstand these economic shocks, even like the ones we're in. 95% of Black-owned businesses did not get that original rollout of PPP loan subsidy because most Black businesses were sole proprietorships, and so many didn't qualify, and it essentially shut out Black businesses from that process. Now, a lot of people though will say Black businesses don't get the investment they deserve, primarily because they're not of quality. They find all kind of, the service is bad, all these other things, but you can actually look at those things using data. Let me just move forward here. And that's what we did in a study. We looked at business revenue. So we did a similar study. We looked at business revenue. We got that from Dun & Bradstreet, and we got the race of the owner. but we scraped all the Yelp data from businesses across the country to get a sense of quality between businesses of Black, brown, Asian, white businesses. But then we control for neighborhood amenities. Again, we control for education, spending power. Again, we wanted to get an apples to apples comparison between businesses. And what we found that Black, brown, and Asian owned businesses actually score higher on Yelp than their white counterparts, right? But when you control for business type, there's no difference really. No significant difference. Black, brown, and Asian businesses are higher, but when you control for things, there's still significant, no different in terms of the significance. But Black businesses in Black neighborhoods receive fewer stars and eventually fewer neighborhoods. I'll show you what I mean. See that magenta line? That's Black, brown, and Asian owned businesses. Again, they score higher on Yelp in all neighborhoods, but as the neighborhood gets Blacker, the scores go down. Again, Black, brown, and Asian business score higher, but everybody's score, regardless of race, go down as the neighborhood increases in Black population. And highly rated businesses experience lower revenue growth as a result. And I'll explain that here. High quality businesses, it's costing high quality businesses upwards of $4 billion as a result. There's a saying in the Black community that says, you used to hear all the time from the elders, our ice is just as cold. The elders knew that if you avoid quality in the hood, you distort the market in a way in which high quality businesses are then forced to compete with low quality businesses. In addition, you just get less revenue, which suppresses the Black community. So the neighborhood's getting less resources because remember, the revenue churned by businesses eventually bleed into the community. So again, this is another example of how devaluation worsens the outlooks for communities. Now, how do you combat these issues? You have to invest in people. You know, you got to see direct subsidies in people. And by the way, you know, the one thing I appreciate the Biden's relief package for a couple of reasons. I mean, I think it has some challenges, but the areas where I think it's good is that it's providing direct subsidies to people. If you invest in place and not people, I'll go to that second bucket. If you invest in place, you eventually increase property values, and if people can't keep pace, they get pushed out. It's classic gentrification dynamics. And so you got to invest in people, meaning homeowners, low interest loans, down payment assistance, business grants. Those kind of things really do help with devaluation. If you can get money in the hands of people, it will animate the activity in it, and value will increase across in the neighborhood, but people can keep pace with the increased value. You also need to remove unnecessary bureaucratic barriers to entry into entrepreneurship and the home ownership. You know, I can't stand these programs now that will essentially have Black people go through some kind of financial literacy course. One, if that's the reason why we have wealth divides and problems. But in this regard, they'll have Black business or entrepreneurs go through some kind of financial literacy course to get a grant or a loan. We don't need that. I mean, as the data show, our ice is just as cold. And so if business owners have this same level of quality, all you really need is the investment. Don't have people jump through these bureaucratic hoops. But we do need to invest in place. Because of devaluation, neighborhoods have less resources in them. And so you need to invest it in place, but it can't come at the expense of people. And so we need to make targeted infrastructure investments in particular in places where there's significant devaluation. We also need to partner with businesses and developers to incentivize other businesses and development in Black neighborhoods. And so, I want businesses to stay and thrive in Black businesses, but I was afraid to release one of my reports because what it essentially said was that businesses in Black neighborhoods would be better off if they moved to a white neighborhood. And so I don't want to incentivize that. What I want to do is correct the situation. And so we need to incentivize businesses and firms to stay in Black communities. But clearly we need to divest in racism. There's so many policies and practices that extract wealth. So if you invest in businesses, you invest in homeowners, and there's still racist policy, you won't maximize the benefit. So you got to remove the policies that extract wealth. Like on the appraisal issue, we have a price comparison model. They use a price comparison model that is fraught. That if you compare homes when you're selling a home or buying a home, when an appraiser compares a home in a neighborhood that's been discriminated against, you essentially just recycle the discrimination over and over again, and you never get out of it. And there's other ways to value homes. Like for our research, we looked at metropolitan areas and we controlled for all these conditions. So we could actually see a home in one part of a metro area compared to a similar area in another part. And so there's other ways to get at comparisons that you don't have to recycle the discrimination. And so we are working with the appraisal industry on that very issue. And we also need to install anti-racist policies that encourage inclusion. We need incentive packages that encourage inclusion. And so we need that. And remember, we've had tons of packages, like even the PPP loan fiasco. It was a package that essentially was a white-only package. I mean, you don't have to have white-only signs up to know the impact of a policy. Just look at the data. And so we need to have spending packages that really demand inclusion. One of the policies I've been backing is for the development of an office in that will demand that the same way we score policies against the impact on the budget, we should score policies on its impact on disenfranchised groups. So this equity scoring that Biden said, that they are interested in, but didn't put a lot of teeth in. So we are working with Congress to establish an office to do that. And actually, I'm going to do work with a group of researchers all across the country to score those policies. And I just want to as I close out, I just want to show the potential benefits, and I'll just stay in business on the overall economy if we invest in Black businesses. So Black people, I said, represent approximately 14% of the population, but only 2% of the nation's employer businesses. If Black businesses were the equivalent of the Black population, there would be 800,000 more Black businesses. Now, that's just not a boom for Black communities. That's a boom for everyone. In this regard, equity is stimulus. So investing in Black communities, and when I study underappreciated assets, that's what I essentially do. Black businesses, you invest in the economy. You grow the proverbial pie. Here, St. Louis actually has the best representation of Black businesses when compared to the Black the percentage of Black people in the community. Most communities have paltry representation of Black businesses. So, I mean, the darker pink, what generally means is a good thing, but you don't really see it anywhere. Oxnard, El Paso, and St. Louis, you know, El Paso, small Black populations. Oxnard, again, small Black population. Really, St. Louis is the only city that can stick their chest out. Let me just go through a few more. If Black businesses increase their average revenue to the level of non-Black businesses, we would see an increase in total revenue by $676 billion. I mean, significant money. If the average employees per Black businesses increase to 23, we would create, which is what non-Black businesses are, we would create 1.6 million jobs. If Black businesses were paid as much as non-Black businesses, then those employees would see an increase in pay by approximately $25 billion. Let me just go through, you know, I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of an offer. I'm gonna offer up something to you guys. I just launched a partnership with the Ashoka organization, the social entrepreneurship organization. We're going to give prize money totaling $1 million to firms, people, organizations who are working on housing devaluation. So if you are entrepreneurial, if you want to work on this, I'll make sure I put the information in the chat, or all you have to do is Google Brookings Ashoka Challenge and you'll get the information. But we're going to give up to $1 million in prize money to people who are working on these issues. If you have new appraiser techniques, if you have new credit scoring systems, new mortgage products, new zoning ordinances, if you can think of ways that will combat devaluation, we want to hear it. And we're going to incentivize it. Now, this competition, you'll be working with people from across the country on this issue. But it's a great a program. We actually start accepting entrants in the summer, so you have a little bit of time. But yeah, it's something that I'm doing. But a lot of this can be found in the book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. So make sure you get a copy. But yeah, but in general, I'll close out and then we can get into discussion. No, I study on research and looks at under appreciated assets, meaning if you just add water, it will grow. And for me, it's like where the underappreciated assets are in Black communities, the housing, the businesses, the people. You know, if you really want to maximize growth for everyone, you invest in Black people, Black communities. That's what's wanting. And so I'm looking forward to having this conversation. I mean, I say this, it's been a roller coaster ride over the last year. When I released the book, I have to say that I didn't plan to release it during a pandemic. I certainly didn't plan to release it during the racial uprising, but it couldn't have been a better time because it's a public policy book, which, you know, most public policy books don't get the kind of airtime as some of your popular books, but it's really getting a lot of attention. And it's because people are now realizing, man, we're extracting wealth, people are dying, and we can restore the wealth. We can restore the value extracted by racism. And I generally have metrics to do it. You know, I got my book title from my favorite play in the whole wide world, It's a play by August Wilson, great playwright, August Wilson. He wrote Two Trains Running. In the play, the main character, Memphis, is about to have his property seized through eminent domain by the city of Pittsburgh. The city offers the character Memphis $15,000 for his property, which he says, no, I'm not selling my property for $15,000. I know my price. I got my price. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's a refrain throughout the play. There's another character, Hambone, who agrees to paint a fence, a proprietor's fence, and he makes an agreement to paint the fence for a ham. He paints the fence. He never gets his ham. Hambone never gets his ham. And throughout the play, he says, give me my ham, give me my ham, give me my ham, until, and we don't know if he had mental illness before he agreed to paint the fence, but he eventually goes crazy and dies demanding his ham. Now, I know people are like, man, that's a pretty sad story, but there's actually a happy ending. The main character, Memphis, gets $35,000 for a property, which is assumed that that's the white rate or the market rate. Now, the moral of the story should be clear is you got to know you have worth. Got to know you have worth. What I try to do with Know Your Price is give people the price to stand on, even if it means going crazy and dying. Because, you know, what's life worth living if you're going to constantly be devalued? And so for me, I've been using this book, to point out the value that's been extracted to show how communities are devalued. But I also use this book as part of the movement, you know, to say, stand up, to get what you're worth. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation, and we'll go from there. Thanks a lot.
Wow, thank you. Thank you.
And right on time, 1 o'clock, I did it.
That's remarkable. Can you, I'm not mute, right? You can hear me?
I can hear you.
You can hear me, great. Thank you so much. That there are so many parts. I think there will be a lot of questions. Let me ask you one while I give the audience a moment or two to think about what their most pressing question. As you have, in the last year since publication, gone around and talked about the book, what are some of the most, what for you has been some of the most interesting ways it's been picked up? You know, what have people done with it that you said, oh yeah, great, and A, and then B, what has their reactions made you think about, here's what I might have done differently, or what I want to do now to nail it better? So those are questions.
Yeah, so I mean, it's been picked up by so many different groups. Reparations, the reparations crowd, the planners, architects, economic development offices, mayors. I mean, mayors are into this, and city council folk, because they're like, I'm losing how much money because of a distorted housing market? Because people don't realize how these markets are so distorted, and it's just robbing everyone really of resources. But it just has damaging effects, particularly for members of Black communities. Obviously, housing advocates, business advocates, education, you know, going back to education, because education's financed that way.
This I get. No, I was wondering whether there was a take on it there that sort of surprised you, that you thought, oh yeah, that you didn't see come, and you said, oh, terrific. That sort of really extends what I was thinking.
Well, I'll say this, it wasn't surprising, but when I first did the housing study, which came out before the book, I had so many economists say, well, this won't matter much. It's been found before. We know that homes are devalued. But I mean, but since then, there's been a number of studies on how homes are assessed in terms of their taxes, on
Hmm.
on I mean, it's exploded in appraisals, discrimination.
Yep.
And I really, to be honest, I knew I was onto something, but it just created this wave
Yep.
of people who looked at wealth extraction. And so now it's my research is just in this conversation about wealth that I didn't really anticipate. Now, it was easy for me to pick up, but I mean, it's not so much I didn't anticipate anything or something that really surprised me, but man, it's really taken off in so many different ways. But if I had to do something different, I would have been even more concrete in terms of policy, how to remedy this up. Now, there are policy recommendations in the book, but
Mhm.
I would have been much more pointed. But I didn't want to, I didn't really want to do that. I mean, I wanted to give people just insight in how to change policy.
Well,
But not,
we want to make some of that possible. So maybe some of our students will work with you on nailing the policies
yeah,
differently. I'm looking at the chat and I see there's a set of questions. Let me ask the audience more generally. If you have questions, put them in the chat. And let me go to Natalie. Natalie asks, can you expand on ways that Black neighborhoods and places could be invested in without displacement? What pieces of infrastructure are the priority in your opinion?
you know, and that's why I mean, I said this earlier in the presentation, you got to invest in people. Like when the percentage of ownership is higher, people don't complain about gentrification. In fact, because people benefit from from then it's not gentrification. If people are able to benefit from development and population growth, then people don't worry. And so I've been working with housing authorities and business leaders to say, hey, we want investment in Black neighborhoods, but we want to make sure that it goes directly to increase Black business ownership, Black home ownership, and we want to strategically place in not only with investment, we want to strategically place policy that encourage economic inclusion in those neighborhoods. So I've been working with a bunch of policy advocates on getting rid of some of these single family zoning ordinances in areas and creating these sort of unique zoning policies that will encourage inclusion in business corridors that are adjacent to Black neighborhoods, so that we can really direct our funding to increase home ownership and business ownership in ways that won't spur gentrification. And it's hard, but I say it in a nutshell. When people own, when they have a stake in the growth, you don't see the harmful effects. And so it's really but and we can do that in a number of ways, but we need to essentially say, here are the areas we're going to make sure that there's room for different levels of housing, different types of business investment, and so that's my answer for that.
Okay, let's go. Let's go to a question of Connor, and if Natalie has a follow-up on displacement, she'll come back. Connor writes, thank you so much for your talk. I was curious how you imagine making non-accountable general organizations like industrial development authorities accountable for giving away a city's tax base in underserved communities.
Yeah, you know, and this is where another Yeah, and this is where I generally insert my talk about Know Your Price, where the title of the book came from, because and this is what I learned from this past summer's uprising. Eventually, people need to stand up and hold them accountable, putting pressure on these sort of quasi-governmental agencies in ways we haven't seen before. And so I've been talking with a lot of organizers, union leaders, on this trade associations on this very issue, because if they're not going to change, we almost have to force them to. And that's not a clean answer, because most people, I work in a policy think tank, and we generally say, hey, this is the policy you need to work. But sometimes it's about saying, hit the streets, demand change, refuse, because for some non-governmental organization, there's not a clear path, accountability path. I'm on this appraiser issue. It's hard to hold appraisers accountable. You can't do it at the federal level. It's at the state level, but it's just hard to do. So what happens? You got to insert this issue in the media, and that's what's happened. And it sparked all kind of changes in policy. Now we can create the kind of structures to hold people accountable, but it's just not going to happen without a demand. So on that's how I've been approaching this. Say, hey, right now it's hard to hold some of these organizations accountable, but hit the streets and it happens.
Let's see.
But I'm going to hit on that. Yes, industry standards are clear. It's like, so this is where I need all of you, because I'm one person. I have been getting into industry standards in various aspects of the housing market, but we need to really vet so many of these industry standards that were built during a time when America was segregated. And so the default is really a racist default in these standards. There's, I'll just stick on the appraiser issue. These systems were built when it was legal to segregate. It was legal. And so the policies were built in that context. And so, when you talk about changing them, you can point to where they are flawed, but what makes it difficult, they become such a part of their tradition, that they defend the tradition in these standards. And they're like, no, we can't change them. This is changing who we are. I'm like, no, but you're producing racist outcomes. It needs to come down. It's not destroying you as a professional, but it's saying that these outcomes are just not sustainable. We can't keep going down this road. So I'm all for changing industry standards. Now I see, can we get, I think it's Alviano, to maybe if you can, because I like hearing the question directly from the people.
Yep.
Hi there, Dr. Perry. Thank you so much for your talk. There's a lot of things in there that my mom is a business owner. She runs an HR firm in Atlanta, small minority-owned, Black-owned business. And we went through it when it came to the PPP as well, and we saw a number of her friends who have businesses, but they're sole proprietors, so they didn't get the PPP loans. And this, I don't really have a question. I have more of a comment.
Yeah.
It sort of chimes in on your statement about how industry standards set the way, and they were set back in a time when we were living in a segregated nation, and how hitting the streets has helped to start to change those policies. In my mom's work, I've noticed that over the last couple of months, a number of real estate firms have been coming to get her to do D&I training and whatnot. And I just found it fascinating because of the fact that, it's such, that ties into this whole industry of segregation and racism and keeping Blacks from home ownership. But now we're starting to see sort of shifts there. So I am, just excited to see that a wave is sort of happening and leading us in that direction, although we still have further left to go.
Yeah, and I'll say this, that my work became so much easier after the summer of 2020. It became so much easier because I became like the Verizon man. I had all these people behind me, that were willing to step out there and call people out and make change. And not often does a think tank person really get this kind of influence. I mean, we are literally changing aspects of the housing industry. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, it's really humbling because I'm sitting in these committees, sitting with industry leaders, appraisal leaders, the head of the National Realtors Association, HUD, all these people, and we're crafting policy. And it's that would have never happened, never, if it wasn't for the summer of 2020. Would have never happened. I mean, there might have been a small chance, but because I think I'm compelling, handsome, and smart, and everything else, and people would have been wild. But the reality is, it
You
was
didn't want to overdo it.
exactly the reality is that the millions of people who were in those streets that demanded change, that's the real reason. But
100%. And, I don't want to take it to too much of a dark place since we are looking towards, a better future. But one of my mom's colleagues, he does a lot of D&I work as well. And he said that, business was booming after the summer. And he called it blood money in a way, because we had to experience the deaths in succession of Ahmaud Arbery and then George Floyd, in order to get people and Breonna Taylor, to get people so riled up and actually really demand change. And it's sad that it took, such tragedies in order to get people to open up their eyes finally.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thing to that in particular with George Floyd, when you look at the conditions in which he lived in an area where the home ownership rate was something like 40 or 36% for Black, or it's either 36 or 46% for Black and 76 for white. The unemployment rate was extremely high for Black people. You can see where how social policy and criminal justice connected with economic policy. And that's why the president, Neil Gaspari, the president of the Minneapolis Fed, is been really working with the board, the Fed Reserve Board, on changing its standards. It was announced recently, Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, is going to change how we look at full employment. Instead of looking at unemployment, we're going to look at a suite of metrics. That wouldn't have happened without people of color in the Fed Reserve Board. And I doubt if it would happen without the deaths and people demanding change. So we're seeing it all over. There's going to be pain, trust me. People are going to go crazy because they're not used to their traditions changing. And you're going to see pain, but we're witnessing change as we speak.
So, Andre, let me ask you a different kind of question. You've spent a bunch of time teaching policy students and now working on these issues with this broader agenda. if you were going to go back and teach in a policy school or in a planning school, how would you think about your work with students differently because of everything that you have talked about since going before Katrina, seeing Katrina? Right, you said you wrote the first book as a creative nonfiction because it gave you a way of not naming the names that otherwise you would have had to name in social science, but still telling the real story.
Right.
So, but that suggests also that you've developed writing strategies in ways that most social scientists don't think about writing. And I'm not sure that in planning and public policy, we think about writing strategies very much at all. So I'm wondering if you'd think either about teaching any differently now or thinking about the importance of writing in a policy context.
Oh man, I'm glad you asked that, because if I was honest, I would say the number one skill any kind of program should develop are sort of writing communication skills.
Oh, excuse me, Andre. Could you say that again? I think I missed that.
Yeah, writing and communication skills. And and I'm sure you wanted me to emphasize that, because let me tell you, when I got to the University of New Orleans, and particularly after Katrina.
This is not a setup.
It's not a setup.
No. But go ahead. This is really important.
After Hurricane Katrina, I said, I'm not useful if I'm writing articles in a journal, academic journal. I need to get out there. And so I still do academic work, right. Like a lot of my reports are very academic, but during or after Katrina, I started writing in a Black newspaper because I wanted everyday people to get that policy analysis that is plain talk. I wanted people to understand what's going on around them, and to have an quote unquote expert communicate in a very plain, direct way to people is something, because then I'll just say that led to, on the local NPR station, I got a 3-minute segment every week in WWNL. And then that led to multiple TV stops. And before you knew it, I had this unique opportunity to communicate my ideas to people. That would have never happened if I didn't take my academic writing to the world. And you gotta learn how to write. Yes, perfect your craft, but learn how to communicate through the written word. Not just, I believe in all social media and all that, but if you can't put together a 800-word op-ed, an essay that takes these lofty concepts and make them plain, then you're gonna cut off most of your audience. And so learn how to write in many different venues, many different forms, and be courageous. One more thing, have courage to succeed and to fail. You know how many times I was wrong and had to own it? You don't have to be, but you have to have courage to write, to put your words out there.
So you got to take a shot.
Yep. I think IT Blair, is it?
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. I'm T, I'm a first year master's student, but okay. We are studying neoclassical urban economics, and Richard Rothstein, your work, it's very grounded in history, and we see discrimination. And yet all these economics theories that we're studying are like personal choice, spatial equilibrium. And I'm trying to reconcile, like, how does this work when we have all of this historic discrimination? when economic models really neglect to add that. They're like, oh, just, you know, for example, Katrina, why build back New Orleans when we could just give the money to people and have people choose, like be people-based as opposed to place-based, place-centric. And I struggle with those type of ideas of like, no, I think we should build back New Orleans, even though it sounds like all the economic theories I'm reading say we should let the people choose, which feels very.
Yeah. Well, I look at it this way, because I work in a institution that is filled with economists. I say this, I really want economists to recognize that they center themselves in public policy. One, and largely they're mostly white, mostly male, and they need to learn. Well, we all need to learn, because in my book I talk about how I was trained to do regression analyses. I was trained to center white, really white men against every other group, that they became the referent group in my, in all of our studies. When we looked at, in education policy, you study the achievement gap. That's the big thing. I mean, and so, and the referent group, we always pick white men. And I used to go, why are white men like the object of our, or the referent? It's because we center whiteness in everything. And white choices are very contextualized. And laden with history. Like right now, the conversation on so many of these programs, should we use wealth or should we use income? If you use income, you essentially negate all the discrimination that has occurred that that did not allow Black people to get wealth. And so on this conversation of should we cancel debt, you have people saying, well, go to college, a college degree will pay out for itself. Well, no, it doesn't. The people who have low wealth have take a much longer time to pay back, much higher default rates. This idea that they're somehow making bad choices is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And so the sort of the classic how choices or how or this use of choice frame, it's just wrong. I mean, it's just off, particularly when you contextualize it in history. So for me, I get out of that by saying, in our approaches, center Black people. How will this policy impact Black people? How will this policy, so when you do your models, figure out how to center Black people. It gives you a different outcomes, different approaches, different policies. I talked about Biden, one thing I applauded, I'm working on this, this issue of these equity scoring things. He talks about equity in terms of fairness. Well, that's good to create fair policies, but there's another definition of equity that's not accounted for, and that's money, fiscal equity. If you're going to repair the damage, you almost have to provide Black, brown, and other folks different levels of resources because they were disproportionately impacted. There's no way around that. And so for me, we got to blow up this choice frame stuff. Okay, one more. I'm going to, this one thing, do we go to 1:30?
No, we've got time.
Okay. When I was in New Orleans, I used to get asked a question. I used to hate this question. What's the fastest way to close the Black-white achievement gap? And I used to hate that, because it's so right. But well, anyway, I used to respond after getting this question over and over. What's the Black-white achievement gap? I started saying, well, the fastest way to close the Black-white achievement gap is to stop educating white people. right? Stop, it'll close. Now, obviously I was joking, right? But I used to say that to say, hey, this is not a matter of people's choices. This is about how are you going, well, it's how are you going to close the gap? Black people can learn just like everybody else. But yet we say we would never not educate white people, but what did we do in ed reform? We fired a bunch of Black teachers because we assumed that they were just bad actors. We expelled Black and brown kids at extraordinary rates, all in efforts to close the achievement gap. This is about policy choices. And we have chosen time and time again to devalue Black people. I mean, and it just drives me nuts. I'm not articulate in this issue because that just boils my blood, because I sit in so many meetings where the assumption is that Black people are irresponsible. That's why I literally have this, there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. Choices change when people have the resources. You know, like this whole financial literacy thing. It's crazy that people think that the reason why we have a wealth gap is because Black people don't know how to handle money. As if the wealth divides were created because white people had that much more financial literacy. Crazy. It's insane. Like, all of our choices are contextualized in a policy environment. So I said enough on that, but it drives me nuts.
As it should. Other questions? There's lots on the table here. Alvina.
Speaking about Biden and sort of the goals that his administration hopes to accomplish over the next 4 years, what are some policies that you are either looking forward to seeing or policies you hope to see that can help to invest in people? For example, I know that with the new child tax credit, you're allowed to get the money up front rather than when you do your rather on a tax than on a tax return. So what are some other ways or things that you're thinking of that where they have room to be creative and things you're hoping to see come out over the next couple of years?
Well, you know, with this relief bill, what's interesting, it's a significant paradigm shift. You know, you go from, you know, banks too big to fail, auto bailouts, all kind of things from the other recession. Yeah. And even this past, we talked about the PPP loan, you know, the big banks, big businesses, these big institutions, this trickle down, and talk about paradigm, the trickle down approach has been the main modality since Reagan, right? And so I actually appreciate this shift to investing in people, direct subsidies. But there's a flaw in some of Biden's approach. Many of these initiatives are temporary. You know, we need to really look at the social safety net. Many of the reason why we have to have these kind of packages is because the social safety net has failed. You know, disasters are going to happen. There is going to be another Hurricane Katrina. There is going to be another pandemic. There is going to be another financial crisis. And we should be preparing for that. You know, when FDR instituted the New Deal, it was a brilliant strategy, brilliant plan. It actually provided security for generations, yet it did not provide it for Black people, right? It missed a couple like populations. You're like, whoa. And many of the people who are dying today are the populations that were discriminated during that bill, or not bill, the suite of policies, right? That layer of the wealth that was created provided literally protection for generations. And so we need to rethink our social safety net. I mean, regarding housing, we need to talk about wealth beyond housing, because in some areas of the country, home ownership is just not going to happen anytime soon. And so we need new ways to create wealth. I love the baby bonds idea. I don't know if you're familiar with baby bonds. Essentially, it's every every born citizen would get a savings account, and the government would put money in that savings account. And when you would turn 18, 21, whatever, you would get that check. You could apply it to your education, to buying a home, whatever. It's not a novel idea. It was actually part of the original New Deal legislation. It was scrapped. But we need things like that. We really need to think about unemployment insurance in a different way. We need to think about hazard pay in a different way. We need to federalize workers. All these people who are essential workers but don't get essential benefits, why not federalize them? You know, or in the very least during times of tragedy, federalize them. You know, I think moving forward, we need to push the Biden administration from making this less about relief and more about structural change. You know, and right now it's so much about relief, and we need relief. We need to deal with this acute situation. But let me tell you, I'm 50 years old, and in the last 20 years alone, I've dealt with a sniper in DC, or maybe a little bit more than a sniper in DC, 9/11. I've dealt with the tech crash. I dealt with Hurricane Katrina, the housing bubble. These things happen. Oh, and every time, what are we going to do about Black people? What are we going to, and it's literally in that vein. Why not change the structures that put Black people in that position?
He's got FDR hanging up inside of the Oval Office, so hopefully, as he continues to build up some political capital, especially after they do this victory lap with the ARP, hopefully he will try to actually have this structural change take place.
No, but I also think that this is my only pushback on that. Biden is a centrist. I mean, he is a centrist, and I'm under no illusion. I mean, well, I'll say this: the pressure that we put on the public to unelect Donald Trump, because I mean, while I think Biden certainly got supported, I actually think this was more about a referendum against Trump than it was a statement for Biden. And Biden was the most electable in some people's mind. With that said, I think that same pressure to get Trump out of office needs to be applied to demand structural change, because he's not going to do this naturally. I mean, remember, he said equity more than any president, maybe combined in the first 100, and that includes the first Black president. Equity more times in the first 100 days than all the other presidents combined. And he's really just talking about fairness, not talking about wealth, not talking about a lot of different things. So I think we got to push. That's what I'm going to do. I don't care who's in office. I'm going to hit them hard with data. I'm going to hit them hard with narrative. I'm going to push but I don't take anyone for granted. And especially, people who really, a political philosophy that believes that it's the middle class. You'll hear this. We got to work for the middle class. Middle class, which is a euphemism for white people. You can easily make an argument there is no Black middle class, given the wealth divides. Easily make that argument. So for me, I'm like, nah, we need to push structural change. I'm not trying to, I don't hear, like for me, I don't hear anything else because I know another crisis is going to occur. And I used to say this after Hurricane Katrina. Are we at the 10-year anniversary, I said, are we any better off 10 years later than we were? And I could not see where we were. I could not see. I'm going to ask the same question right before, when those miscreants stormed the State House, or not the State House, the Capitol. They stormed other state houses before.
State House in Michigan.
Yeah, you're right.
Getting that work at it before the real deal came up.
Yeah. So if I'm going to, I'm going to ask that same question: are we any better off? And I'm going to ask that a year from now, the next year after that, and if we're not, I'm going to keep demanding. And so, unfortunately, people they don't like structural change. They like these temporary, this relief packages. I'm just not into that.
Thank you.
Other questions? Come on now. Commentary. You can say, "Oh, that guy's bullshit." It doesn't matter. He's talking a lot of shit right now. It doesn't matter. You can say that. Because look, one thing I will say, I've been doing this. I've been intentionally going to audiences that are not friendly, talking to conservative groups, talking with, because at some point you do need to confront, to face people.
Andre, let me ask something. I don't see another hand here, and if we were not sitting in the middle of 50 people, I know what I would ask. I'd ask you about it. It'd be over a beer, though. So I'm wondering about a line of questions that would say everything you're talking about, that would almost grant everything you're talking about and say, a lot of these structural policy shift, the notion of policy shifts that attempt to change structure over time, all is important and unarguable and could be granted, and still the underlying issue that is not quite being addressed as it might be is one that Biden actually has named since taking office in a way that no other president has ever named, and that's white supremacy.
Oh yeah.
And domestic terrorism obviously being part of that, but white supremacy being much more connected to the underlying political, cultural history of racism.
Yeah.
Right? And it's completely unfair, given the context of your research and biography as you presented it, to sort of try to connect these dots, but we have to, right?
Oh yeah.
It seems like no way to talk about the policy changes and the structural context that you're talking about is so important without thinking, okay, so how does recognizing and resisting and subverting or addressing white supremacy figure into this?
Well, let me tell you, I'm squarely focused on white supremacy, dismantling the architecture of that that system. And I'm fortunate to work with my president of Brookings Institution, John Allen. He's a former General John Allen did a lot of work in Afghanistan, and he has made that his mission, in particular, around ridding law enforcement and the military of white supremacists. You know, when Biden said we will eliminate white supremacy, that actually signaled something that they were going to do in the military. So, and so for me, I think it's actually, that's one of the easiest places to start, because it's actually easier to get the evidence for white supremacist activity among soldiers and police forces than it is to get that information from teachers, from fire departments, from all those other, you know, and so, obviously private industry is very difficult. And so this is one thing I'm actually hopeful about, that if there's one thing good that Trump gave the world, is that he put a mirror to America's face and said, this is who we are.
Yep.
And almost half of America agreed that this is okay, almost half. And you can look at it in a couple ways, that, oh man, there's so many people who just can tolerate racism, sexism, homophobia, this outward, I mean, and just blatant.
Right.
But for the first time in American history, really, did the more Americans say, you know, it's time to change. I mean, it's time for change. And so I think now it's about, in the pursuit of weeding out white supremacy, numbers are actually on our side. It's just going to be, the next 20, 30 years is going to be painful. I mean, just as, you know, there's people who could not stand the idea that, you know, this might seem trivial, but it's really not. This Meghan Markle, because I don't really follow this issue, but
you don't follow the royal family every day?
I don't. But when I say,
probably most of the audience doesn't either. Okay, go ahead.
But when I say they disrupted tradition in a way that, like, what made that 2-hour interview a world event.
Yep.
Like, and so we're in the midst of disrupting tradition of white supremacy that is so ingrained in our society. You know, I talk about it from a policy, a housing perspective, but, you know, these appraisers and appraisal systems and all these different things, it's just normal in people's mind.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so for me, I actually think we're going to see the kind of changes eventually, but it is going to be painful, because just like the Piers Morgan walked off out of disgust. I can't believe this Black woman. I can't believe it. That's almost half of America. I can't believe I have to say Black Lives Matter. I can't stand seeing, every time I look up, there's somebody saying Black Lives Matter. I can't stand it. Like it's, I mean, and so I actually love that disruption, because when I say people think that this change is just going to come and we're going to just look up using the phrase, it's just going to disappear. White supremacy is just going to disappear. No, it's not. You know, it is going to be a painful process of weeding out white supremacy, but it is already happening. But there's going to be casualties. There's going to be periods where we're like, how did that happen? Like Donald Trump. There's going to be periods where we're like, holy, it's going to get, but we're actually improving over time. And that's why I will say this. I'm not, you hear a lot of Black public intellectuals talk about how there's no hope. Why should I have hope? I have a lot of hope. I just am very realistic. The how massive a change this is. So you manage your expectations, but when I look at the work in Georgia, what it took to turn that state blue, how can you not have hope?
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you look at the people who demanded change after George Floyd's death, how can you not have hope? I mean, my son, I'm gonna make this real personal. I'm in DC, and I used to live right down the street from Black Lives Matter Plaza. And on 16th Street, there's a bridge and an underpass. And my son and I, right around when one of the first major protests occurred, we heard Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter coming out of the tunnel. And we were like waiting for the group to come out. And it was all white people, right? And I was like, wow. And my son, who's 10, he saw a crowd of white people chanting Black Lives Matter, right? Now, my son knows me. He knows that I'm all about that life. He also only generally sees other Black people saying Black Lives Matter. And I grew up in a pretty protesty type of family. And most of the protests I was involved with were mostly Black. My son really sees the world differently as a result. And so that gives me hope. Now, if you ask me, all those people, white people chanting Black Lives Matter, where they're going to send their kids to school, that's another story. Because you could put people there, these protesters to the test real quick. But in terms of change, man, that was enormous for my son. I mean, enormous. And so I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
But I also think, man, there's going to be some pain. There's going to be some bloodshed. There's going to be a lot of negative things. Because remember, I'm over talking, but I mean, my grandmother, the woman who raised me, Mom, she used to always talk about the people who died, who were killed during the civil rights movement. She said, hey, they took her, they knew they were going, she would say, they knew they were going to die. And they kept going. And so I'm very clear. We have freedom fighters today. They may not have the same kind of, because times have changed. It's so decentralized. There's leaders everywhere, right? Which is a good thing. And so, but there will be people, and there have been people who have been killed over the last few years over this stuff. So I'm very clear, but man, I'm hopeful. I am hopeful.
Alvino has a hand up, but I want to echo one thing on hope in this context. Guy in planning at Berkeley used to say the best definition of planning that he knows is planning is the organization of hope, right? And that's not the organization of fantasy. That's realism. The organization of what can we really do? What can we really achieve in this world? And that seems so much more evocative notion of planning and even policy making than any simple problem solving. So Alvina, let's see, well,
Dr. Perry, when you were speaking just a moment ago, you lit a fire in my stomach and you brought back these memories of what I saw over the summer. And I was thinking it's about damn time that this shit happened. I grew up in Georgia. First I grew up in a neighborhood called Providence Plantation before, my family split up. But I remember working in Savannah, Georgia, and I worked at this place called Bob's Your Uncle and Fanny's Your Aunt. And they were selling books, Briar Rabbit and the Tar Baby, minus the Tar Baby on the title, but they're still selling Briar Rabbit. They're selling Little Black Sambo. They're selling bootleg copies of Songs of the South. And when I confronted my manager about this, he told me, well, this just reminds people of their childhood. And, it's not so bad because it's an Indian kid on Little Black Sambo and not a black kid from Africa. And just to see that, to also experience racism growing up, getting called, getting called nigger growing up, white kids telling me that when I was born or when I was in heaven before I was born, God allowed them to stand up and that's why he painted them white, but he had me on my hands and knees and had black folks on their hands and knees bending down in front of him. And that's why he colored us black. Just like stuff, just ridiculous things. But then to now see that, it is a multiracial coalition that is fighting for, human rights for everybody, for respect for everybody, for civil liberties for everybody, makes me so proud and hopeful. But also, like you said, you got to stay vigilant and realistic at the same time, because there are going to be failures along the way. There's going to be setbacks, and there's going to be people that, continue to push for white supremacy, neo-Nazism, and whatever these Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and so on and so forth are pushing nowadays. So thank you for sharing that.
But before I get to you, Brittany, I just want to say one thing is regarding that. One of the best structural changes, if you will, that we could have is around education in history. A lot of folks are so ignorant on slavery, Jim Crow racism, redlining, racial housing covenant. And when you're ignorant, you fill that void with conspiracy theories and this falsehoods. And so what I appreciate about the 1619 Project is that it forced people to look at different history differently. And once they did that, it's on. Because history is generally told by the victors, right? But in the American case, particularly around the Confederacy, it was told by the losers. And we need to be clear about that history, that slavery robbed people of liberty, material resources, their lives. And this continued for hundreds of years, going through and then transitioning to Jim Crow racism, historic discrimination. People really don't know. Now, there are a lot of people who are just racist people, but a lot of that racism comes from ignorance. And so I think that one of the things we can do is educate, because people think that getting rid of certain Dr. Seuss books and that's just too much. And that's no, this is how racism persists through these passive devices that we just don't get to. Brittany, I got to get to Brittany because we only have a few minutes. Sorry.
You got it. We're there. Brittany, welcome.
Hi, thank you for allowing the public to attend this lecture. And I apologize, Andre, do you have a doctorate? Should I call you Dr. Perry, or should I just call you Andre?
You can call me.
Brittany, we've got about 2 minutes. I think you should
Oh,
ask.
okay. Well, my question is, I'm really interested in communications and planning, and I want to know, in your experience, what tone of communications tends to elicit the greatest understanding and compassion of the ideas that you're talking about?
Oh, great question, because I actually think that there's different approaches, and we need all of them. You know, some of it, you know, I operate from a very Spock-like fact-based perspective. You know, however, I also realize, and this goes back to my time in Katrina, that if you don't have personal narrative with your facts, you're not going to have the messages. It's not going to be doesn't resonate the same. So I do think there is an aggressive tone needed sometimes. There's a more reconciliatory tone you should take, and those come from different people. I know I really operate from a perspective of don't blame people, blame policy, and insert narrative. Understand the rhetorical power of numbers and the power of narrative stories.
Wow, fabulous.
So for me, I really punch those stories a lot, as well as the power of numbers. And so when I do that, man, things take off. But in this I just want to thank you all for inviting me. It's, you know, I'm an adjunct professor, so I don't teach a lot. And so, you know, most of my work, I'm just a fellow at Brookings. And so when I do teach, I love it, but I love just talking with, you know, people like you. And so I just want to thank you and giving me opportunity to share some of my information.
Let me thank you with the imperial place of the chair of the meeting. That's been extraordinary, and you've covered a wide range, personal narrative, the numbers in lots of different ways, policy questions, more structural questions, cultural questions. I think it's been a wonderful couple hours, and we're fortunate to have been able to spend it. And we have to figure out how to bring you back. So don't go too far.
All
okay?
right.
And let's keep in touch. And I'm sure if some of the audience sends you an email here or there, you'll get back to them. So Andre, let me thank you again very, very much. It's really terrific. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. We'll see you next colloquium.
All right.
Well.